Welcome to the 7 steps of reloading. Today, step number 1, cleaning our cases. We're going to be using the Lyman Universal Decapping Die today to knock the primers out, get them ready to go into our dry media tumbler, which will clean the cases up and get them ready for subsequent steps in the reloading process. So let's get to the close-ups.
First chance we have after returning home from the range, we take a moment to perform a gross abnormality check of all the cases. We're looking for case head stamps that we wish to exclude, like when we pick up our brass and someone else's brass gets mixed in. We look for signs of high pressure, fatigue, cracking, swiping, etc. Really obvious failure indications. Big detail stuff. Cracked necks, primers that have the firing pin detent blown out, which is also known as blanked primers, and any cases that are the wrong caliber. We use loading blocks for this inspection, as it makes seeing things that are different from case to case much easier. Those abnormalities really stand out. Immediately discard cases that are questionable or show obvious signs of damage. It makes no sense to waste time cleaning cases if we already know they're bad. Remind yourself that brass is a consumable commodity. In this instance, we're looking at range pickup of 223 or 556 brass, so the mixed head stamps are to be expected. Here's a few failures we commonly see. The cases on the right side are caved in, the necks are folded, and there's a caved in section on the body of one of them. These cases are to be discarded immediately due to the damage they've sustained. The next two cases are physically decent, but that patina keeps us from inspecting the cases in a meaningful way, and so they too must be discarded. The case on the left has an obvious dent in the case mouth. This dent is far too severe, and the case is not worth trying to save. Don't waste your time trying to save cases. Remember, they're consumable. If you find this happens to your brass during ejection or from being stepped on, for instance, get a brass catcher. We can recommend the Brass Goat. It works well in both the AR-15 and AR-10 variants. Next, we have a fine example of case head separation. This is a very serious issue, and it's important that we learn to see the signs of this so we can catch it early. Case head separation happens when brass is stretched too thin by repeated firing, and the body separates at the base of the web. It can also indicate excessive headspace. This lets the genie out and can end your day at the range prematurely. This line, the sharp line, is the case head separating from the case body. The line below that is where the resizing die ends its stroke, and that's normal. The sharp line, however, is a big red flag. Time to figure out what's going on. Another reason for gross abnormality checks is to ensure all the cases going into clean are of the same caliber. Here, we have 308 cases next to 6.5 Creedmoor cases, and they are surprisingly similar. Set them next to each other, and it's obvious which is which. If you fail to separate these cases, while tumbling they will insert the smaller neck into the larger one, preventing thorough cleaning, and sometimes they get so stuck together they're damaged when you're trying to pull them apart. Another example of why we separate by head stamp and caliber is that some calibers are nearly indistinguishable from their brother calibers, like the .380 automatic and 9mm. There's only 0.074 inches difference between these two. Can you see the .380 here? How about now? If not for standing them next to each other, we might have missed that and tried to load the .380 case with 9mm components. Remember to separate brass by caliber and calibers by head stamps. Be very deliberate and conscious of your initial inspection phase. Now that we've done gross abnormality checks and initial inspections, we prepare our tumbler by adding a little polish to the tumbling media and let that work into the grains for a while to evenly distribute the polish. If you throw brass in too soon after adding polish, that polish can clump up, and the clumps will find their way into the cases, clogging them up. We buy flits, berries, even Brasso as polishes, whatever's available and cheap. For tumbling media, we use pet store walnut reptile bedding because it's much cheaper than the official reloading media, and it's exactly the same stuff. Let that tumbled media run for 15 to 20 minutes and distribute the polish evenly through the media. Use that time to set the bench up for the next step, decapping. We choose to decap our dirty cases for 3 reasons. 1, we get to feel how well the primer is held in the case. If it's loose, we discard it right then and there. 2, it's easier to see if there's anything left inside the case after tumbling if we sight through the flash hole. And 3, resizing is much cleaner if the primers are already out. Any grit or dirt that was trapped in the primer is expelled before the case goes into the tumbler and won't be there to get stuck in our case lube during resizing. Today's cases are range pickup 223 and 556, so some have a factory crimp on the primer. The universal decapping die easily punches the primers out, crimped or not. It's an added step, to be sure, but it works well for our process. Decapping dies are just a punch that punches out the primer. The case is not altered in any way. We run the cases through the decapping die and toss them directly into the tumbler for their initial clean. Notice all the trash left behind with the spent primers. That would have been stuck on the lubricated cases when we resize them later. Better to have that out as early as possible. There's some important reasons to clean our cases. 1 is to make case inspection easier. We can't adequately inspect the cases if we can't see when they've been damaged. The second reason is to prevent damage to our equipment. Dirty cases going into a resizing die will decrease the accuracy of that die. Dirty cases going into a seating die will lead to inconsistent seating and therefore less accuracy out of our ammunition. A third reason is to ensure safe and complete ignition. Dirty primer pockets can lead to inconsistent primer seating and inconsistent ignition in the powder. The powder itself can also be degraded by dirty cases if the interior of the cases are not clean. The fourth reason is to prevent feed and function failures. It should be obvious that dirty cases will increase the probability of a feed and function failure. We want our ammunition to function flawlessly. And the fifth reason is that clean cartridges store longer. Having removed the dirt, having removed the grime and any moisture, having removed the lubricant for the resizing step, our cases will degrade much, much slower. We can store them in our ammo cans and keep them clean for a much longer period of time. There are many ways to clean your cases, but there are 3 primary methods of cleaning. The first is dry tumbling. It's very popular using walnut or corncob media. A second is wet tumbling, it's also very popular with steel pins. The third, less popular, is ultrasonic cleaning. The advantages of dry tumbling are that it's cheap. Doesn't cost much to get started with it. It's low maintenance. All you have to replace is the dry media itself. And over tumbling won't damage the brass. We often leave the brass to clean overnight. The disadvantages are the media does wear out. You have to replace it as soon as it stops cutting quickly. And more importantly, the dust has aerosolized lead particles in it. You do not want to breathe the dust. The advantages of wet tumbling include clean brass that has been run up to a very high polish. And it's true, those cases are very clean, both inside and out. The primer pockets are very clean. There's no doubt. But the disadvantages are that it's very expensive, costs a lot of money to get started doing it, and it's very time consuming. Simply cleaning the brass is just the start. You also have to rinse it down. You have to make sure that the steel pins aren't stuck inside of the case or in the primer pocket. And there have been some people who claim that there's a potential for damage to rounding the case mouths. The primary advantage to ultrasonic cleaning is that it's very fast. The brass does come out clean, although not smooth to the touch, but it's very quick. 10, 15, 20 minutes in an ultrasonic cleaner is like an hour in any other tumbler. The disadvantages include that the brass is not particularly shiny. It's less shiny than if you did it in a dry tumbling media, for instance. Also, If you leave it in too long, you can damage the brass from the chemical exchange. You can typically only run small batches, and this is also prohibitively expensive. We use the ultrasonic cleaner for small parts cleaning, breaking the carbon off of our muzzle brakes and so forth. So we took a 45-minute break for lunch and let the cases run, and now we're ready to separate our cases from the tumbling media. Don't breathe this dust here. There's lead particles in there. Don't breathe that dust. Pick up the cases and dump out the media. Make sure that they're clean. It's another chance to inspect. Make sure the primer flash holes and pockets have no media in there. We'll put you on high speed so we don't waste your time. And that's it. Doesn't take long. We've withheld a few cases here for show and tell. They're okay to use, but we thought it worthwhile to show you the cosmetic blemishes that are common to range pickup brass and AR-15s in general. There are slight markings on the case body here. That's from extraction. It's mostly cosmetic, and it's likely caused by the deflector on an AR-15. This case has stains on the case body. It's nothing to be alarmed about. They look good, and they'll live to shoot many more times. Small dinks and marks on the shoulder and case mouth are common and do not represent an alarming issue. And a little before and after. The cases on the right are uncleaned, straight from the range. It's obvious they're dull and they're dirty. The cases on the left, after initial clean, have the primers removed. Grit and crud are cleaned out of the case and off the external surfaces, and they're ready to move on to annealing and then resizing without fear of damage to our sizing die or dirtying our bench needlessly. Don't worry. After resizing, we'll do a second clean, and these cases will be brought up to a very high luster. Well, that wraps up the initial clean. We'll see you in our next video, annealing. Thanks for watching.